Hey guys, in this video we are diving into accessibility, and specifically I want to show you how to implement an accessible single select dropdown, also known as a ComboBox. For me it was maybe the hardest thing to implement, and I decided to share it with you and also to give some tips how you can implement different widgets based on WCAG patterns. So first of all, I want to show you this page. You can Google just WCAG patterns and then it will come to this page. So here WCAG collected all the patterns that, for example, you can't implement with semantic HTML, because I hope you know already that if it is possible, you should use in 99% of cases semantic HTML, and then you won't have any problems with accessibility. But of course we have different design requirements, and clients not always want just simple buttons and simple inputs and such things. They want something more complicated. That's why there are different widgets. And here you can find, for example, ComboBox, what we are going to implement today. And it usually describes what exactly this widget is. Yeah, of course, it might be a lot of text to read, but the good part is that if you implement something only once and it works good and everything was considered, then you just can reuse it throughout your other projects to make it a reusable component. And after that your work will be done. So first of all, I would say that in the beginning you have different types of this pattern, and usually you should probably read everything that is written here, because here people really explain why this is important and why there is a reason actually why this pattern should be implemented in a way that it is written it should be implemented. So for example, ComboBox, it's usually different widgets that have associated pop-up, and it can be input widget, or we are going to implement just the usual one button, and usually it has a pop-up, and it can be or dialog or listbox or grid or something else, and we are going to look at listbox because that's what our drop down going to be. Here you also can see a description what it should look like, examples, keyboard interaction, and also in the end they usually have, but for example when you open some of examples, then you see that there is an example with code in JavaScript in CodePen, which is also already kind of has everything that you need, especially the keyboard interaction. And also here, for example, you have all roles and properties and everything that is connected to ARIA, and then that should be also implemented. And here, for example, you also see HTML example of this list box. So it's really helpful. And as I told you already, if you implement something once, it's going to be just reused by you everywhere, which is kind of cool. And also one more tip. So for example, we are going to look into select only ComboBox. It doesn't have input field, nothing fancy, just in order to show you really the example. And for example, at work we use these types of drop downs a lot in our project. So yeah, it looks in such way. And one more tip, that for example when you open a CodePen, you can, for example, it is written in JavaScript, and for example I work with React. That's why I just, in order to spare myself time, I copy everything that is written here and copy, for example, HTML. CSS usually doesn't really help because we have different styles. But I copy JS and HTML boxes to ChatGPT and ask it to rewrite it in React. And then, for example, I just go through code, I copy everything that makes sense and fix everything that doesn't work. So yeah, I think, to be honest, that it really helped me to save time and to implement these widgets faster. So let's begin. First of all, as I already mentioned, because it's going to be select only ComboBox, we are going to implement a button which is going to open a listbox. Here you can see that you have two patterns. First of all, it's a ComboBox, and here listed all areas that we need to add. And after that, we'll implement listbox pop-up, and after that, we'll go to keyboard navigation. So let's start with ComboBox. I already created a project in React. I will also put a link to this project on my GitHub in the description. So first of all, in order to have an opportunity to style it better, let's create some sort of div. And I already also added styling. That's why I'm not going to tell you what exactly and how to style. You can have a look at the styling in my repository. There is nothing special. That's why you can do whatever you want. So let's call it drop down select container. And eventually we will need also to add here some status. For example, if it is open or not. Let's do it later. So now we are going to add a button. With some span, and there will be shown or chosen option or placeholder, let's say. But for now, yeah, for example, we are going to create a drop down of fruits. That's why we can write for now choose fruit. Also, span is going to have class name. It's not drop down select, it is placeholder. And it should have ID. That's why we'll add something like also drop down placeholder. Now back to button. It also has few class names. So first of all, it's going to be called drop down select control. And after that, we'll also need to add if it is open and also if it is disabled, for example. But it depends on you if you want to, because it's always not a good practice to add disabled to buttons or anything in your UI. It's not really it's not good usability. Another workaround for it, it's a little bit more of code. You can add ARIA disabled in order for blind users or users that use screen reader to understand if something is actually should be disabled, and then to disable this button through CSS, like visually, and also of course to add checks in your keyboard logic and also to your on click, that for example if this button should be disabled, then nothing should happen. And we need also of course an ID. Let's just set something like only select drop down. Later we are going to add also the list itself. So first of all, let's have a look. What the pattern tells us, and let's implement it. So first of all, this button should have a row of ComboBox. Then we need to add, I think the easiest one here is, it's not listed here, but it's also also should be included, that ARIA has pop-up. Yeah, it is included here in the example. And it should say that it has, as a pop-up, there is going to be a list box. Then we have ARIA expanded. It indicates if the pop-up element is not displayed or is displayed. And we are going to add ARIA controls. It indicates also the element, which element this ComboBox controls, and in this case, which element plays a role of pop-up. And it is going to use an ID. So for example, it is a little bit confusing, but ARIA has pop-up should show the element itself, the name of the widget, and ARIA controls should have an ID of this widget. Then we have ARIA active descendant. We'll add it a little bit later. It's more useful for keyboard navigation. Yeah, to clarify it really shortly, it's just an indicator which refers to an option that has now visible focus. It's really useful also for assistive technologies and also for visual focus, let's say. So, role, as we said, ComboBox. ARIA has pop-up. Listbox. ARIA controls. And we'll add ID a little bit later. ARIA expanded. And for that, I think we can already implement a state of this drop down. So for example, let's call it is drop down open. And also set, and we need to import use state. I will leave use effect also because we are going to need it a little bit later. So now, for example, we can already use is drop down open for our class name. For example, here we can say that if is drop down open, and we want to show, and we want to add class open. And for example, we also have the same class here inside button. And we can now add it to ARIA expanded. We also have, as I mentioned, ARIA active descendant, and we are going also to create it in our state. And in the beginning, it's going to be null. And after that, we can send it here. That's it, I think, for ComboBox. One more thing, we can also add ARIA labeled by, because we have some sort of placeholder or chosen value. And here we are going to use this ID. not this one, this one. Now let's create the list of options. It's going to be just hard-coded. For example, array of some fruits. Yeah. Also that if options, for example, if there is no options, then it should have a class of disabled. And we will add ARIA disabled so that assistive technologies could say that there is nothing should be clicked. Yeah, that's already the beginning. Now we will move on to our pop-up or listbox. Let's see what we have here. First of all, let's open also listbox pattern in order to see what this should have. And for example, this scrollable listbox example shows that first of all it should be unordered list. Everything that is thought to be a list should have a role of unordered list and should have list elements, list items. So that's already the first thing that we need to implement. So we are going to add, for example, a list box, our unordered list, and it is going to have a row of list box, and every list item is going to have a row of option. And also it should have ARIA selected true when it is selected. That's it. Actually, for the list box from the point of ARIA, so not so much. So let's go and try to implement it. As I mentioned, it should be unordered list, and let's add also some class in the very beginning. It also should have an indicator that is going to say that if it is open or not, but let's call it menu transition visible, and then not here, we are going to add that if is drop down open, then we are also going to add an open class. We need an ID in order to tell here to add it to ARIA controls. So let's add it just list box, for example, and we are going to copy it also here. And as mentioned already, it should have row of list box. It should have tab index -1 so that it's not focusable. It can have ARIA drop-down, ARIA labeled by drop-down placeholder, and it also can have ARIA multi-selectable false, so that it's really clarifies to assistive technologies that no, you can't choose few options. Then we can go through options. And here we are going to return list item. we'll add key, we'll add some class name. It should class name of item, and also few other class names. So for example, we also need index. And for example, when index, we are going to add also active index in our state. For now, I'm just going to write it and I'll add it later. So in order to understand what element is actually focused right now with our keyboard, and we are going to add if this option equals selected value. I'm going to add it also later to our state, and then it's going to have class of selected. Yeah, pretty it. It's much. But for now, we also need to have an ID, and we are going to implement later on click. For now, let's just do it empty. And we need to have row option. And as I mentioned before, ARIA selected. ARIA selected. And it's going to say, again, we are going to orient ourselves on the index. So, and here, for example, we can add some span or just option. That's it. Let's add few things to our state. So first of all, let's add active index. I think I copied it already. Yeah. And in the very beginning, it's going to be -1. And then we need also to add selected value. And in the beginning, it's going to be actually just empty string. So yeah, after we started the project, we can see that we have now a dropdown. It doesn't work yet because we didn't implement any logic. Let's add, for example, on click to our button. We need to do prevent default, and then we are just going to set is drop down open and to use pref state, and yeah, to change it. That is not pref state anymore. That is this one. Let's see that it works. So now, yeah, now you can open it. You still cannot choose it, but yeah, you can open and close it. Let's add select logic. So we are going to create a function and call it, for example, select, and just add here value. And actually I'm going to use this function also in order to close the dropdown. That's why the logic is going to be a little bit strange. So for example, if there is some value, then I'm going to set selected value. But if not, then I'm going just to close the dropdown and to change everything to its initial state. So for example, at that point we are going to have active descendant, and we are going to set it to null. And also we need to set active index to back to -1. So that's next time when we open dropdown, no matter where our focus was, that it's going to be again or nowhere according to pattern or somewhere depending on what keyboard was pressed, what key was pressed. So here, that's why we are going to add on click to our list item. On click. Sorry, I edited already, I forgot. That's why we are going to do it here. And we're just going to call select and send there our option. So let's check that it works. It was selected, you can see it by the UI, but what we need to add, one more thing, we need to use a selected value instead of placeholder if something was selected. So for that, let's go back to our code, and here when we say only choose fruit, now we need to check that if there is a selected value, then it's going to be selected value. And if not, then it's going to show choose fruit. Let's check again. Yeah, you see it was already updated. So when I choose something, then it is chosen accordingly. Now we are coming to more difficult part, and this is, as I already mentioned, keyboard navigation. So again, I really love how all these patterns are described. And there is, for example, there is listed already everything that you need for keyboard navigation. And sometimes also I see that they add in brackets, for example, that it is optional. And for example, we all have deadlines and everything, and really and projects that need to be like completed urgently. And also, for example, people might be in panic mode because of accessibility requirements and everything. So first of all, I think, in my opinion, the most important part is to implement everything that is not mentioned as optional. And after that, when you have time, you can finish it implementing things like nice to have. So for example, let's start with ComboBox. It is mentioned that it is closed ComboBox, so it means that here all keyboards navigation that is connected to this button. So, and I think it is always easier to divide all this logic between, so to speak, navigation button. So for example, when you just go through the elements with some buttons and everything else. But in our case, we also can group these keyboard buttons by few types. So for example, there are some keys that when they are pressed, it just opens the listbox. And you can see that it is mentioned actually pretty much. So open the listbox, and also there are many keys that just open the listbox without moving focus or changing selection. It means that everything that we need to do is actually to open the listbox. So we can group these keys. You see that everything that we have here, it is down arrow, up arrow, alt plus down arrow, enter space, home end, and printable characters, but we are not going to do it right now. It is more connected to if you would implement this widget with input. First of all, we need to add on key down to our button. And we are going to call the function handle key down. Now let's create it. And as I mentioned already, we can just group our navigation keys and call it, for example, if it's nav key. You see like that it will be really helpful later. And here we have arrow down, arrow up. We have just up and, for example, down. We have home and end. End. And then we're going just to check if this array includes event key. And also for navigating, you saw that most of the keys tell that you don't move focus, but there are a few keys that they actually move focus to the first option and to the last option, and it is up arrow, home and end. And because of it, in order also to implement this logic easier, we are going to create first index and last index. First index is, of course, null, 0, I don't know. And last index is, of course, options length -1, const. And we can also create already a function and call it const update index, and it's going to receive index. And what it is going to do, it is going to update active index, and it is always going to update active descendant, but active descendant is going to be the element, list element itself. We are going to update it just with this element. Actually, let's do it a little bit in a better way. Let's check that if active descendant, then of course active descendant, otherwise it should be undefined. So let's continue for now. And first thing that we are going to implement, it is when the dropdown is closed. So here, first of all, after we do everything, we need just to go out of this function. But before that, we are going to check, for example, if it is navigation key was pressed. And if it was, then we need just to do prevent default. We need to open our dropdown because that's what happens every time. And then we have, as it was mentioned already, a few options. If it's just some navigation key that doesn't move focus, then dropdown should only be opened. But if it is, for example, arrow up or up or home, then we are going to update our index also. And we are going to update it to first index. And then we have also end keyboard key. You can implement it not with include, of course, but with equals. And then we are going to have update index to last index. And that's pretty it. After that, we are going to continue writing here code for our listbox. But for now, it is what it is. So let's check that it actually works. So when we, for example, press space, it is opened. We didn't implement escape, that's why it will not work. If we press, for example, enter, this is opened. If we press, for example, key down, this is opened. If we press key up, this is opened and the first element is focused. And if we press, for example, home, this is opened and the first element is focused. And if we press, for example, end, this is opened and the last element is focused. And let's check that also it has right areas. So for example, ARIA expanded is true and ARIA active descendant is orange right now. And also here in the list box, for example, the first option, we still didn't implement the index logic. That's why ARIA selected still doesn't work, but we'll do it now. I saw that I made a mistake. So for example, in update index, we only need to set active descendant and not set active index, because we don't select, for now we do not use this function. We do not select an option when we just move visual focus. And yes, it was a little bit not right. But now, for example, now when we again go to the developer mode and check here, for example, I think I need to reload. So now I choose the first option and we see that here ARIA selected should be not index but option, and it should be equal to selected option, selected value. For example, when I open it with end, then you see that ARIA selected is still on banana and not orange. Let's continue implementing our keyboard navigation. So now we will need to go to the list box itself, and it's going to have pretty much of a lot of code, but yeah, I think we will manage it. So we are going to add, first of all other keyboard options. And to be honest, when it is a huge list, I prefer to use switch case. It's always a question of the taste, but yeah, we'll do default and just do break. And now let's have a look again. We are going to go one by one because there are many keyboards, but again, I think the easiest ones are always arrows, so to speak, navigation keyboards. And we see here listbox pop up. So first of all, again, let's start with all these arrow or navigation keys. So for example, when we press down or up arrow, it just moves visual focus to the next option. But important part here is that, for example, if it is the last or first option, then that's it. You do not move focus anymore. And there is also Alt plus up arrow. It is a little bit more complicated. It should set value to the content of the focused options. It should close the list box, and it should set visual focus back on the combo box. So yeah, we are going to start with them, and after that we are going to implement home and page up, page down. In my case, I'm going to implement page up and page down the same as home and end, but when, of course, in the reality you have many options, you need to jump through these 10 options. And you also need just to move focus to the first or to the last option, that's it. So first of all, we have arrow up, and we have also up. And here we are going to prevent default in the beginning, and we want also to check if Alt key was pressed. And we'll implement it a little bit later. But when not, we are going just to find pref index, and it's going to be, we are going to check if active index, for example, is less or equal now, then we are going to put now. So focus doesn't move anymore. If not, then we are going to do active index -1. And then we are going to update index with pref index. And break. After that, we are going to do the same with arrow down and down. And here we are going to do the same. We are going also to prevent default. And then we are going to find next index. And we are going to check that if, for example, active index +1 equals options length, then we are going to leave it, and when not, then we are going to do active index +1, and then we are going to update index. And to do break. That's it. Now we are going to, moving to, for example, home. Oh, thank you. And for example, as I mentioned already, I will do the same for page up. And in this case, we are also going to do prevent default. And we are going just to update index with first index. And break. Now the same with end. And page down. Again, prevent default. And update index with last index. And break. That's pretty it. So we implemented already all navigation. So we open it. We can go with our arrow up, arrow down. You can see that, for example, I am on the first element and I'm trying to click to press again arrow up, but it doesn't work. And the same comes with arrow down. Except for it, we have also, for example, end and home. So for example, when I click on home, I jump to the first element. When I click on end, I jump to the last element. So after that, we have all this choosing. I call it choice logic keys or select logic keys. So for example, it's all this enter space. It means that, for example, when you press enter, it sets the value to the content of the focused option in the list box, closes the list box, and sets visual focus on the combo box. The same happens with space. And the same we saw happens with Alt plus up arrow. So actually that's what we are going to implement right now. So we are going to say if it is enter or if it is space, we are going to do again prevent default, and we are going to use our select function. And we are going to send here options active index. And we are going to do break. That's pretty it. And the same we are going to do with Alt and arrow up here. So we want, for example, choose apple. I press space, it is chosen. I press space again, nothing is chosen. I move focus to orange, I press enter, it is chosen. I press again enter, nothing is focused, sorry, but orange is chosen. And also I press, for example, I go to banana and I press alt and up arrow, and it was chosen too. What else we have? We have a little bit tricky thing. It is tab. So with the tab, it should set the value to the content of the focused option in the list box, close the list box, so it's pretty similar to enter space, but it should also perform the default action, moving focus to the next focusable element. For now, we don't have anything on our page except for this button, but for example, if you add another button, so focus should move to it instead of staying on this button. And let's see how we can implement it. So we are writing case tab, and here, that's the important part, we do not do event prevent default, because otherwise the focus will not move to the next focusable element. And actually that's it, you don't need to do anything else for that. But you need to also to select a focused option, and that's it, you do break. That's it. Now, for example, it will be a little bit hard to see, but for example, I am on the apple and I press tab, and that's it. The apple was chosen, but because we, as I mentioned, don't have any other elements, the focus was moved to this browser tab. When you have more elements on your page, then it's going to be to work. What else we have? We have only escape key, and it just closes the list box and sets visual focus on the combo box. So nothing too difficult for that one. We also need to do prevent default. And we are going to close drop down. We need to set active descendant to null back. And we need to set active index to -1. And that's it, we do break. And that's pretty it. Let's check that it works right with escape. So I opened, I am moving, I just close. That's it. So yeah, that's pretty it. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it is going to help you. And I hope that these tips also are going to make accessibility a little bit less scary. It seems to be a little bit complicated, and it feels like it is a lot. But again, if you implement it, if you understand it only once and implement it once, then you can reuse it and be proud of yourself.